All right, if you clicked on this link, then that means you're still interested in this topic, or you're just interested in the fireworks surrounding this topic. And what I found more interesting about the debate itself was the media reactions to the debate. We have 4 major newspapers in Toronto. Yeah, 4. That's a lot. And there wasn't even consensus about what the debate was actually about in court terms. It ranged somewhere, as the Toronto Sun says, political correctness, gender identity rights, and free speech, that every single one of those should have been their own debate, and the fact that they weren't led to some confusion about what the debate was actually about. The Toronto Sun said that Jordan Peterson was arguing that rubbish science is being used to falsely claim that virtually all difference between males and females is essentially an invention of society. I don't think that's what the debate should have been about, because it was a linguist, a law professor, and a psychologist. There was not a single scientist on the panel, but that doesn't change the fact that that's what the Toronto Sun is saying it was about. The equally, if not more, conservative National Post decided to cover this through an opinion column, and you'll see the headline: "If gender identity debate was at U of T was about free speech, then the battle is truly lost." Well, that's a nonsense headline. Was it a gender identity debate? Was it a free speech debate? Well, it's kind of both. And that is part of the issue. Those are big issues in and of themselves. But I wish the National Post had given more coverage to this other than just Christy Blatchford, because in this article, she proudly refuses to use a preferred pronoun for one of the participants, Dr. Mary Bryson. Dr. Mary Bryson goes by they at the UBC site. Stop it, Ed. But Christy Blatchford outright refuses to refer to them as they. She keeps calling her. So bias declared. The Globe and Mail, which leans conservative because it's a pro-business paper, but has become increasingly socially progressive over the years, was quite damning in its opening paragraph. The claims made by University of Toronto psychology professor Jordan Peterson on the impact of anti-discrimination legislation are scientifically and legally wrong, a debate at the Toronto University heard on Saturday. I think that's actually, I guess it's accurate, but it's a misleading statement. I don't believe they used Oxford rules. I don't believe they voted at the beginning or the end. I haven't seen any indication of that, but, there were 2 people there who argued that he doesn't know what he's talking about. That is fact. But what they said the debate was about was Dr. Peterson has argued that human rights legislation which bans discrimination on the basis of gender identity or gender expression is a form of political correctness. Okay, so we're back to political correctness instead of free speech, and some people claim that's linked, but they're not the same thing. The Toronto Star, I think, got it best, and I normally agree with Rosie DiMano on nothing, but she's spot on this one. Gag order versus gag reflex. Distilled to its unacademic essence, that was the vexing point-counterpoint debate, with much mutual antagonism of a controversial forum at the University of Toronto on Saturday over the hysterically exaggerated lexicon of disputed gender pronouns. To silence or to rage, to swallow dogma, or regurgitate dissent. And Rosie DiMano, in those opening paragraphs, absolutely captures my issue with the way this debate was run. The person on the right in this photograph, by the way, blurry, that's Mary Bryson. Would you assume that's a woman? Mary Bryson is gender nonconforming. They are a they. They are not a he. They are not a she. They are a they. And it's not hard to get your mind around that if you just put in a little bit of effort. But back to the issue. Actually, that is the issue. Personally, I am not going to learn 30 different pronouns. Why? Because that's an impediment to communication. The people that I speak to have to understand what I'm saying. This is why I continue to say transgender, even though I know among activist communities it is more politically correct to say trans. People do not know what I mean if I just say trans. The word gets missed in audio. Transgender, people understand. And it's the same with pronouns. They, people can get their head around. Zir and Z and all this stuff, it's as much as I see the intellectual point with creating a part of speech as opposed to bastardizing the plural, there are easier ways. And it just seems when you start creating pronouns that seem like alien races, an edgy cartoon, or something that the Scientologists worship, then people start thinking you sound silly. And this is not a moral argument. This is just a branding argument. This is how to get your point across and get something that everybody can accept. It's not a question of it feeling weird. It's a question of it feeling foolish. And there's only so far you can push people to go before they just go, you know what? No, I'm retreating back to a place that it's safe. And so, while the people who oppose the explosion of alternate pronouns have a point in that regard, the viewpoint that Dr. Jordan Peterson presented at this debate was equally foolish. Free speech is something that he at least had the potential to successfully argue, because the concept of free speech is not something that it's a wide enough cultural thing that it has gone beyond the legal definitions of free speech, which I was compelled to use when I wrote for various publications, by the way. My editors would not allow me to talk about free speech as a social concept. It had to be the legal concept because they were all lawyers and that's the way they saw things. So compelled speech is all the way through journalism, like it or not. But I think he would have had a leg to stand on had he stuck there. That has been the rallying cry. That has been the most appealing part of his argument. And I admit, I don't like, in principle, the idea of compelled speech. I don't like the idea that I have to be forced to say something instead of people taking the time to make me understand why I should want to say something. I need to feel like it's my choice. I understand emotionally the urge to dig in. However, I realize compelled speech has been a part of practically every job I have taken. When I worked at a car dealership, I had to answer the phone because I was the receptionist. Thank you for calling Downtown Toyota. How may I direct your call? Could not deviate from that script at all. We even had a name for something over the intercom so that people wouldn't accuse us of racism for people who phoned up and needed a Mandarin-speaking salesperson. It was Toyota call. That was what I had to say. When I worked in talk radio, they rebranded the station from, oh God, I don't even remember the call sign anymore, the CFTR or whatever, and I wiped it from my memory because it was News Talk 1010. CFRB, that's right, that's what it was, but I so wiped it from my memory, so I didn't actually say it on air because you got in so much trouble for saying CFRB. Because it was News Talk 1010 now. But that sort of compelled speech is seen as branding, and that's somehow okay. Even though the name of the call sign for the station was still CFRB. We just weren't allowed to call it that. It was News Talk 1010. It seems so foolish, but this means an awful lot to people in the private sector. It's only in the public sector where you can outright refuse to use the scripts that your bosses give you and still even have a hope of keeping your job. And I think this is why some people have a really hard time, myself included, sympathizing with Professor Peterson's plight here. Wow, that was some nice alliteration. Was it Professor Peterson's plight? It sounds like a Beatles song, doesn't it? Or a Bette Midler song. But, and this is the practicality of compelled speech. The reality is that people are compelled to use certain terms for work all the time. And this is what he is being asked to do. Now, if they threw 30 different compelled speech terms at us at once, it would be a hot mess. And so he has something of a point where it is fair for staff at the University of Toronto to understand where the lines are before they are subject to a workplace policy that could get them in trouble. I could accept that argument. But there's too much precedent for compelled speech in both the private and public sectors. I remember my stepfather coming home years ago when he was associate dean, I think, when they rebranded the chairperson of a department just chair, because it was shorter and fit on nameplates and badges and things like that better. Chairperson was too long. And my stepfather came home grumbling about that because chair was a bloody piece of furniture. It wasn't a person. He didn't refuse on principle to even attempt to make the change. He complained about it, and rightly so. It seemed really foolish. But now, most people in academics and business just use chair referring to a person without even thinking about it. It evolved. There is an ideological driver to Professor Peterson's protest. I did it again. That I think goes a little bit deeper than a compelled speech argument. And this came out in spades at this talk. And I'm going to do this, and please, if you're a supporter of his, hang on, because I'm going to lambaste the other side as well. Okay? He started his remarks, and I am stressing this as a tactical error, not a moral one. Okay? He started his remarks by asking all the women present to stand. And to be quite honest, if I was there, I wouldn't, just based on principle. You're here arguing compelled speech and you're compelling me to stand? Screw you. I would have stayed sitting. And then he asked all the men to stand. And maybe I would have stood up just to be a cheeky bastard. I don't know. But Rosie DiMano said there were a handful of people that didn't pick a gender side. And she says only a handful, but the fact that anybody did was an indication that, hey, some people didn't. But this wasn't the purpose of Professor Peterson's project. Here, I keep doing it, the PPP, it's just too fun. A 2-to-1 ratio favoring men, he noted. So what? Who cares? Even Rosie DiMano called BS on this line. And this was just, if you want to persuade someone that you are only interested in compelled speech and don't have a greater ideological agenda driving you on this issue, this is precisely the road you don't go down. People in academia should know, after what happened to Larry Summers, that this line of thinking is a bad idea. And DiMano described it as sailing off into the unquantifiable, except maybe among clinical psychologists dancing on the head of a pin. And I immediately say that in Yoshimo's voice from Baldur's Gate, because I can dance on the head of a pin as well. That's the line. But he claimed gender differences in the realm of ideas. Yes, apparently there are masculine ideas and feminine ideas. Huh? There are pronounced gender differences with openness, such as men are higher in intellect, which encompasses an interest in ideas, and women are higher in aesthetics, which encompasses an interest in art and literature, which is in part why men read more nonfiction. Actually, as somebody who works in the publishing industry, it's because nonfiction tends to cater more to a male audience because of precisely the stereotype that this originated somewhere in the 1950s. It has been completely debunked, and we have come back to sort of a middle ground since then. And I want to just take a brief moment to say what science really says on this matter, because it ain't this. This is very, 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 very old thinking. So basically, they sum it up. This article sums up what we know about nature versus nurture and gender is we do socialize our boys and girls differently, but the contribution of biology is not zero. And this is a walk back from the thinking circa 1980s when the nature versus nurture became very much nurture. This was a debate started in around the 1960s. And it's swung back and forth ever since, but the swings are getting smaller and smaller, and we're kind of narrowing in on what we do know. And there are some things we do know, but it ain't that boys like science and girls like art. So what we have is that it's how people navigate from one place to another. Men show, on average, quite a greater aptitude in rotating an object in their minds and angle orientation and navigating by cardinal direction, meaning like compass points. Women have more verbal fluency and greater memory for objects, remembering where things are. So basically, men are better at 3D objects. Women are better at match 3 games in general. So that means men will navigate via compass points, latitude and longitude and such, and women will navigate using landmarks. But the point they make is you can get from point A to point B using both. And it doesn't mean that men or women have different levels of intelligence or different interests. Because the whole thing is boys like math, boys are better at math. That was the big thing forever. But what they found that in more gender equal societies, the math advantage in boys disappears. What they actually found the greatest indicator for academic achievement was, especially with men, was socioeconomic bracket. So rich men do very, very well. Poor men do not well at all. They don't go on to college. And they actually found that the distribution in aptitude was more even among women than it was among men. Men cluster very high or very low, whereas as women are more evenly spread out, which is really interesting. Do we know that this is completely biological? It's hard to say for certain because we don't have a historically female-dominated society to compare anything to, and that's the unfortunate thing in this whole thing. We don't have a control group, right? But the biological determinations and that spatial stuff, and it's funny because the thing I scored highest at when they tested me for gifted stuff in the first grade, so I was a year early at that time, was pattern recognition. So all these things that men are supposedly better at, fold this block. If you unfold the block, where is the red space? I was awesome at that stuff. But that defies the norms. But the problem, apparently, is getting creative in the marketing of professions. The example they use is engineering, because, it's undeniable that and whether there's a core biological component for that or not, it is considered more normal for a woman to go into a helping profession. What job can I defend to my mother? Trust me, it matters so much. And engineering, for instance, is not advertised as a helping profession, even though it is very much a how to make the world better for large groups of people kind of profession. It is. On the other hand, caregiver jobs, men are kind of looked at askance, make less money, and may even get, implications that they're perverts if they want to work with children. So this cuts both ways. This is why when an academic starts going into these very dated ideas of gender, and I mean, this is, God, this is 60, 70 years old thinking, and two swings of the pendulum we're talking here. This is something that we have to consider. I'm not saying you dismiss his whole argument based on this, but it is concerning that his knowledge of the issue is so dated. But now I want to pivot to that thing I said about I'm going to smack down the other side too. I'm now going to step to the people who boycotted this debate and their reasons for it, and why this was just as foolish, if not more so, from a tactical position. The Queer Caucus of CUPE 3902 sent an open letter saying they were boycotting the debate because human rights are not up for debate. Oh, really? Really? Check your history. Check your history, because history indicates human rights were developed through debate. It is precisely these kind of difficult situations, this sort of deliberation, high-level deliberation, that led to the development of our concept of human rights. It allowed us to step away from divine and absolute rule by a priest king, which is what we came from before we got books like the Torah or the Old Testament for y'all Christians. Islam attempted to raise the Arab world out of the realm of, jinn worship into something more codified, more philosophical. It's still working the bugs out there. We did not start as a species with the concept of inalienable human rights. This came first through religion, then through religious dissent by way of the Protestant Reformation, which, aided by the printing press, led to the democratic uprisings of the American Revolution and the French Revolution, where we got declarations of the rights of man, like all men are created equal. And we still screwed that up because someone decided that all men didn't include black people or women. And so we had to debate that. And then somebody determined that marriage rights were because the Bible said so, between one man and one woman for all time. That's it, no debate. Well, people said, hell yeah, debate. And we debated. And now we have marriage equality for most in this country. The divorce part is still something we're working out, but gay couples can get married. And now we move on to this idea of transgender rights. And the only way we advocate for transgender rights is through debate. So I don't do this very often. I don't dismiss things in such abrupt terms, but I will say this on this. This position that human rights are not up for debate is just ignorant of history. And I think I took you through sort of a Cole's Notes version on this. And this is the problem. This is the whole issue I have with this format, is it's extremists fighting extremists with extremist ideas. And regular people who work jobs and have tough lives and just want to go their own way and not be bothered with this nonsense are screaming, why do I care? And it's getting nowhere. In fact, these two extremist sides often slow things down more than they speed them up, because it gives the people who want to oppose progress on semantics cover for their foolish arguments. And with all this outraging and it's called political correctness, but it's really not. Political correctness is about niceties and keeping the status quo nice and inoffensive. These are the safe things for you to say. There are no safe things to say anymore. We've gone beyond political correctness. We are in the era of outrage. Political correctness is too safe for these outrage warriors. That is not what the law is enshrining. The law is not because of these fools with signs who say human rights are not up for debate. This law is because of the high unemployment and high suicide rates among transgendered people. And pronouns are a part of it, but pronouns are very much a symptom of the issues facing transgendered people, not the root cause of the inequalities they still face. And spend any time looking at the actual realities of being a trans person in North America now, instead of just focusing on these pronoun semantics, and a very grim picture is painted. And I feel like this whole argument is warping the intention of a bill. And Jordan Peterson had the opportunity to get up there and make a principled case about free speech and a principled case about making sure that laws are properly worded and properly written, because that is very important. And even if he's wrong, it doesn't negate his right to be concerned. He took time away from those important things he could have said to sort the audience by gender and talk about women liking art and men liking intellect and things like that. And this, when people have a forum like this, it really brings out what is truly important to them at their core. And this is something, you know, the Trump lesson, that this is something that we have to look at and address instead of just shout down. This idea that some people are very attached to the idea of binary gender and the things that men are and the things that women are. And it's going to take time to disabuse them of these ideas, because they've been held for a long time and reinforced by their social circles and usually their families. My eventual conclusion, reading books like Judith Butler, you know, and Camille Paglia, a lot of Camille Paglia led me to this, is we put too much emphasis on the meaning of gender and not enough on the meaning of individuality. And so, of course, I'm going to disagree with someone who are going, men are and women are, because I'm like, no. Individuals are. And maybe if we started treating people more like true individuals, they wouldn't line up along gender lines. It bothers me that there is no moderate voice invited to the table at these debates. It's always this false binary, ironic enough, that you have the extreme of one side and the extreme of the other side. Round one, fight, finish him, right? Instead of, you got the guy going, you're saying this and you're saying this, but what about this middle ground issue? Because that's the representation of the vast majority of people that is not being represented in these thought experiments. And it leads to this false dichotomy that comes from these two completely intractable positions. No one's willing to bend. And so most people go, I don't agree with either of you. These debates boycott sense. Like, you see it replicated over and over and over again on the radio and debates in college campuses and in you know, political parties and cable news. It's all the partisans, the noise, the freak show, because they think that that's what people want to see. people are tuning out. The reason so many people are so uninformed on these issues is that being informed is so bloody unpleasant.